Prince Louis speaks out. What he said about Camilla's child left a royal guard shaken. The morning inside the royal residence began like many others, quiet, measured, and wrapped in routine. Soft light moved through tall windows, touching polished floors and old paintings that had watched generations pass. Staff members moved carefully, speaking in low voices, careful not to disturb the calm. Everything followed an unspoken order, one shaped by tradition and long memory. Prince Louis was there that day, sitting near a long table with papers and books neatly placed nearby. He was still young, often seen smiling or observing quietly while adults spoke around him. No one expected anything unusual from him that morning. To most people, he was simply a child growing up inside a world far larger than himself. A royal guard stood at his post not far away. The guard had served for many years and had learned to notice details others missed. He knew the rhythm of the palace, the sound of footsteps that mattered and those that did not. He also knew that silence often carried more meaning than noise in this place. The room held a small gathering, nothing formal, nothing meant for attention. A few aides were present, along with another guard and a member of staff arranging documents. It was one of those moments that never made it into schedules or records, just a pause between duties. Prince Louis had been listening. His eyes followed the adults as they spoke about simple matters, plans for the day, movements between rooms, small adjustments to schedules. Then, without raising his voice or seeking attention, he spoke. His words were calm. There was no laughter, no drama, no sign that he meant to surprise anyone. Yet the sentence he said landed differently than expected. He mentioned Camilla's child in a way that sounded thoughtful, not playful. It was not rude, not loud, and not emotional. It was simply clear. For a brief second, the room seemed to stop breathing. The guard felt it before he understood it. Years of training had sharpened his instincts, and something about that moment felt different. He did not turn his head right away. He did not react. He stood still just as he was trained to do, but inside his attention sharpened. Prince Louis did not continue. He did not explain or repeat himself. He simply looked forward as if he had said something ordinary. To him, it may have been just a thought spoken out loud. To the adults in the room, it felt heavier. One of the aides adjusted their posture. Another cleared their throat softly. No one corrected the child. No one asked him to repeat what he had said. The conversation moved on, but not smoothly. There was a pause, a small gap where the words hung in the air before being quietly ignored. The guard noticed all of it. He had heard many conversations over the years, most of them private, some of them sensitive. He knew how quickly people learned to act as though something had not been said. Still, this moment stayed with him. It was not what was said alone, it was how it was said. Prince Louis had spoken without fear, without caution. There was no hint of testing limits or seeking reaction. His tone carried the quiet confidence of someone repeating something he believed to be true or important. The guard asked himself a question he usually avoided. Where would a child hear something like that? The palace was full of voices, but not all of them were meant for young ears. Conversations echoed down halls, stopped behind closed doors, or continued in hushed tones when children entered rooms. Most children absorbed more than adults realized. Still, this felt different. The guard remained at his post, his expression unchanged. Inside, however, his thoughts moved quickly. He reminded himself of his duty. He was there to protect, not to question. Silence was part of his service, yet silence did not erase memory. As the gathering ended, staff members began to leave the room one by one. Papers were collected, chairs moved quietly back into place. Prince Louis stood and followed an aide toward another part of the residence. He looked relaxed, unaware that his words had caused any shift at all. The guard watched him go. For the rest of the morning, the palace returned to its usual flow. Doors opened and closed. Footsteps echoed along corridors. Orders were given and followed. Outwardly, nothing had changed, but for the guard, something felt unsettled. He replayed the moment in his mind while standing through long hours of duty. The words were not dramatic, yet they carried weight. They suggested understanding, or at least awareness, beyond what most people expected from someone so young. The guard wondered whether the child had overheard a private conversation, or perhaps someone had spoken too freely, assuming young ears were not listening. In a place like this, assumptions often led to mistakes. Still, the guard knew better than to draw conclusions. He had seen how stories grew from small moments, how misunderstandings became rumors. He reminded himself that children sometimes spoke without full meaning. That alone could explain everything. And yet, something about the calm certainty in Prince Louis's voice made it hard to dismiss. As the day continued, the guard noticed subtle changes. Staff members avoided each other's eyes more than usual. Conversations ended when others approached. There was a carefulness in movement, a quiet awareness that had not been there earlier. No one spoke of the moment directly. That was how things worked here. Important matters were often buried under routine, left untouched unless absolutely necessary. By evening, the guard's shift was nearing its end. The palace lights softened as night approached. The quiet grew deeper, heavier. Before leaving his post, the guard took one last look down the corridor where Prince Louis had disappeared earlier that day. He felt a strange mix of responsibility and helplessness. He had witnessed something small, yet he sensed it mattered. He knew he would never speak of it. Not to colleagues, not to family, not to anyone. That was part of the role he had accepted long ago, but memory did not require permission. As he walked away, the guard understood that some moments never needed witnesses beyond those who were present. Prince Louis's words would not be written down or recorded. They would not appear in reports or histories. They would live only in the quiet mind of a man trained to notice what others missed. And that, he realized, was sometimes how the most important moments began. The guard did not sleep well that night. His body was tired, but his mind refused to rest. Every time he closed his eyes, the same calm voice returned to him. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. He told himself again and again that it was nothing. Children spoke freely. Children repeated things they did not fully understand. That was normal. Still, the feeling would not leave him. By morning, he was back in uniform, standing tall, his face calm and unreadable. Years of service had taught him how to carry thoughts without letting them show. As he entered the palace again, the familiar scent of polished wood and quiet order surrounded him. Everything looked the same. Yet to him, it felt slightly different, as if a thin crack had formed beneath the surface. He paid closer attention than usual. Not in a way anyone could notice, but in the careful way of someone trained to observe. He noticed how certain aides lowered their voices when children passed by. He noticed how one staff member paused mid-sentence when Prince Louis walked into a nearby room. These were small things, easy to ignore, but the guard did not ignore them. Prince Louis appeared later in the day, walking beside an aide, his steps light and untroubled. He greeted people politely, smiling the way he always did. There was no sign that he remembered the words he had spoken the day before, or if he did remember, he showed no concern. He was simply being himself. The guard watched him from a distance. He felt a strange mix of respect and confusion. Children inside the palace lived surrounded by rules, yet they also moved freely in ways adults could not. They asked questions others avoided. They spoke without fear of consequence. Sometimes, that made them the most honest voices of all. During a short break, the guard stood near a window overlooking the grounds. Another guard joined him, speaking casually about the weather and schedules. The guard listened but said little. He had learned long ago that silence protected more than words ever could. As the hours passed, the guard began to understand something important. It was not just what Prince Louis had said. It was how the adults had reacted. or rather how they had chosen not to react. No corrections, no explanations, just a quiet decision to move on. That decision told its own story. The guard remembered moments from earlier years, other small incidents that had been brushed aside in the same way. He had seen how the palace handled uncomfortable truths. They were not argued with. They were softened, delayed, or simply left alone until time covered them. By the end of the day, the guard felt heavier than before. Not because he feared consequences, but because he understood his position clearly. He was close enough to witness history, but far enough to never touch it. His role was to stand between moments and memory, holding things that would never be spoken aloud. As he left the palace that evening, he accepted something quietly. Whatever Prince Louis had meant, whatever the truth behind the words might be, it was not his place to uncover it. His duty was to protect the present, not question the past. Still deep inside, he knew this moment would stay with him. Some words once heard could not be unheard. The following days moved forward with careful calm. On the surface, everything returned to normal. Meetings continued. Visitors came and went. The palace worked like a well-maintained clock. Yet beneath that smooth movement, there was a quiet awareness shared by many. The guard noticed it during small pauses. A look held a second too long. A sentence left unfinished. Staff members had learned to read the air around them, and the air had changed. He overheard nothing clear. No direct talk. No open concern. Just hints, scattered and incomplete. That was how things traveled here, not through words but through silence. One afternoon, the guard stood near a corridor where staff often passed quickly. Prince Louis walked by again, holding a book, absorbed in his own world. As he passed, the guard felt a surprising sense of respect. There was something brave in innocence, something powerful in speaking without knowing the weight of words. The guard wondered how many truths in history had first been spoken without intention. He thought about the palace itself, its long walls and deep foundations. How many secrets had these stones heard? How many moments had been quietly set aside? He realized that history was not only written by those in power, but also shaped by those who chose silence. As evening approached, the guard felt calmer. Not because he had answers, but because he had accepted uncertainty. He understood now that not every moment demanded action. Some moments existed only to be witnessed. That night, as lights dimmed and the palace settled into rest, the guard stood once more at his post. His thoughts were steady, his expression unchanged. The world outside remained unaware of anything unusual. Inside, however, a quiet understanding had taken root. Something small had happened, something that might never be spoken of again. And yet it had left a mark on those who heard it. The guard knew that years from now, he might still remember that simple sentence spoken in a calm voice. He would remember the pause that followed, and he would remember how silence, once again, had done most of the talking. Without realizing it, he had become a keeper of an unwritten moment. And in places like this, such moments often mattered more than anyone admitted. The days that followed felt longer to the guard, even though nothing unusual appeared on the surface. His duties stayed the same. He stood where he was told, watched who he was meant to watch, and followed every rule without question. To anyone looking at him, he was calm and steady, the picture of discipline. Inside, however, his thoughts moved quietly, never stopping for long. He began to notice how much of his life was built on restraint. From the moment he joined the service, he had been taught that loyalty was not only about action but also about silence. He was trained to see everything and say nothing. This had never troubled him before. He believed in the system. He believed that order required limits. But now a small conflict had started to grow inside him. It was not anger. It was not doubt in his role. It was a simple question that returned again and again. What happens when truth appears in an unexpected form? Prince Louis had not asked for attention. He had not tried to challenge anyone. He had spoken naturally, the way children often did, without layers of meaning or hidden plans. That was what made the moment so powerful. There was no effort to control the message. It simply existed. The guard thought about how adults spoke in the palace. Every word was chosen carefully. Every sentence was shaped to avoid misunderstanding. Even casual talk carried caution. Children, however, lived outside those rules, at least for a while. They spoke before learning fear. As the guard stood watch near a quiet hallway one afternoon, he observed staff members moving past him. Their faces were polite, their movements practiced. These were people who knew how to protect appearances. He wondered how many of them carried thoughts they would never share. He realized then that duty was not always about doing something. Sometimes, it was about holding something heavy without letting it fall. One evening, after a long shift, the guard found himself alone in a quiet corner of the palace grounds. The air was cool and the noise of the day had faded. This was one of the few moments when his thoughts felt free to wander. He thought about his oath. It had been spoken clearly with pride. Protect the family. Protect the institution. Protect the peace. That oath had guided him for years. Yet now he saw another side of it. Protection did not always mean hiding danger. Sometimes it meant carrying discomfort so others did not have to. He asked himself whether knowing something meant having responsibility over it. The answer was not simple. Knowledge did not always come with permission to act. Prince Louis continued his days as usual. The guard saw him laughing, learning, and moving freely through parts of the palace. There was no sign of fear or confusion in the child. That in itself brought the guard a strange sense of relief. Whatever the words had meant, they had not harmed the child who spoke them. The guard began to understand that children often reflected the world around them more clearly than adults wanted to admit. They repeated what they heard. They noticed what others ignored. They felt changes in mood even when nothing was said aloud. That realization softened something inside him. He stopped trying to solve the moment. Instead, he focused on understanding his place within it. He was not there to decide what was true or untrue. He was there to ensure safety, calm, and continuity. One afternoon, he noticed an aide pause near a doorway, watching Prince Louis walk past. The look on the aide's face was thoughtful, almost concerned. When the aide noticed the guard, the expression vanished, replaced by professionalism. Nothing was said. That silence spoke clearly enough. The guard felt the weight of shared awareness. There were others who remembered the moment. Others who had chosen, like him, to carry it quietly. In a way, that made him feel less alone. As time passed, the sharpness of the moment softened, but it never fully disappeared. It settled into the background of his thoughts, like a low sound that could only be heard in quiet moments. He learned to live with it. The guard also learned something about himself. He realized that loyalty did not mean blindness. It meant understanding limits and respecting them, even when curiosity pushed against those boundaries. Late one night, as he stood watch under soft lights, he looked at the long hallway ahead of him. The palace seemed endless, filled with rooms that held stories no one would ever hear. He felt a sense of humility. History was larger than any single moment, larger than any single voice. And yet, history was also made of small moments. A sentence spoken, a pause held, a choice not to react. The guard accepted that truth and duty could exist side by side without colliding, as long as each remained in its proper place. His duty was not to interpret or expose. His duty was to stand, to watch, and to protect. As his shift ended, he felt calmer than he had in days, not because the conflict was gone, but because he had found balance. He understood now that some truths were not meant to be handled by everyone. Some were meant only to be acknowledged and then respected with silence. He walked away from his post with steady steps, knowing that the palace would continue, unchanged on the surface. Life would move forward, schedules would be followed, smiles would be exchanged. And somewhere within those walls, a quiet moment would remain, untouched, held safely by those who understood its weight. For the guard, that understanding was enough. Time continued to move forward, steady and unannounced. Days turned into weeks, and the palace returned fully to its familiar rhythm. If anyone outside those walls suspected that a quiet moment had once disturbed the calm, there was no sign of it now. Life carried on as it always did, guided by routine and tradition. For the guard, however, the memory never truly faded. He noticed how easily the world moved on. New tasks replaced old ones. Fresh conversations filled the halls. Smiles appeared where silence once lingered. This was how the palace protected itself, not by denying moments but by allowing time to gently cover them. The guard remained at his post, dependable as ever. His work required no reflection, only presence. Yet presence, he had learned, was not an empty thing. To be present meant to witness, and to witness meant to remember. Prince Louis grew more confident with each passing day. The guard watched him from a distance, noticing small changes that came naturally with time. He spoke more during lessons, asked questions freely, and laughed without concern. Whatever weight his earlier words had carried, they no longer touched him. He was a child living in his moment, not in the past. That realization brought the guard comfort. He understood then that the palace had done what it always did best. It protected the future by refusing to dwell on what could not be changed. Children were allowed to grow without being shaped by the quiet tensions of adults. That, perhaps, was the greatest form of care. One afternoon, as the guard stood near a large window, sunlight filled the room. Dust moved gently through the air, visible only because of the light. The sight reminded him of memory itself, always present but only noticeable when light touched it just right. He thought again about the words Prince Louis had spoken. They no longer felt sharp or troubling. Instead, they felt like a simple truth that had passed through the room briefly, leaving no damage behind. The palace had absorbed it, just as it had absorbed countless moments before. The guard realized something important then. Not every truth demanded response. Some existed only to remind people that no system, no matter how careful, was ever completely sealed. Human voices would always find small openings. As the months passed, the guard became more at peace with his role. He no longer replayed the moment as often. When it surfaced, it did so gently, without tension. It had become part of his understanding of the place he served. One evening, near the end of a long shift, he watched as Prince Louis walked past with an older family member. The child was talking excitedly, his hands moving as he spoke. The adult listened, smiling, fully present. There was warmth in that simple scene. The guard felt a quiet respect for the balance the palace maintained. For all its rules and formality, it still made space for moments like this. Moments where a child could simply be a child. He understood now that what had shaken him was not fear or concern, but awareness. Awareness that truth did not always arrive through formal channels. Sometimes it arrived softly, through unexpected voices, and then moved on. The guard accepted that his memory of the moment was enough. It did not need to be shared. It did not need to be explained. It had served its purpose simply by being noticed. As years would pass, many things would change, people would come and go, roles would shift, stories would be written and rewritten. Yet some moments would remain unwritten forever, living only in the minds of those who had been there. The guard knew he would be one of those people. Late one night, as the palace settled into deep quiet, he stood alone at his post. The halls were still, the lights low. In that silence, he felt a sense of closure, not because the story had ended, but because it no longer needed his attention. He had done his duty. He had protected not only people, but peace. The guard looked down the long hallway one last time before his shift ended. It stretched ahead, filled with rooms, memories, and moments yet to come. He felt no regret, only understanding. Some stories were not meant to be told loudly. Some were meant to exist quietly, shaping those who witnessed them in subtle ways. As he walked away, blending back into the rhythm of the palace, he knew one thing for certain. The moment that once shook him had taught him something lasting. That silence, when chosen with care, could be a form of wisdom. And that was something he would carry with him, long after the echoes of that single sentence had faded into time.